Mr. Speaker.
Order. Questions for oral answer. Mr. Xie Yao Chun. Is it? Dr. Tan Wu Ming.
Mr. Speaker, sir, on behalf of the Prime Minister, may I have your permission to answer PQs 1 to 4 by Mr. Liang Eng-hwa, Mr. Pritam Singh, Dr. Tan Wu Ming, and Ms. He Ting Ru on today's order paper, please.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Sir, let me first set out ELD's key executional objectives at every election, which is to ensure, firstly, that only bona fide voters are issued with ballot papers, secondly, that no extra ones were put in, and thirdly, that all votes cast are counted, so that the election result is determined by the eligible voters for that election. To achieve this, we have put in place a set of procedures that need to be complied with. Let me explain. Upon the voter's arrival at the polling station, the election official will verify his identity and eligibility to vote at the polling station and then register the voter's attendance via a hard copy polling station register or the electronic registration system. Thereafter, the voter is directed to the ballot paper issuance counter. The election official issuing the ballot paper is required by law to read out the name and voter serial number of a voter before the voter is issued a ballot paper. This allows the polling agents to mark their copy of the register and provide an additional check to ensure that only eligible voters in the register for that polling station are individually issued with a ballot paper. As a result, when the votes are tallied for an election, we can be confident that the outcome is the one decided by the eligible voters for the election. After the end of each election, ELD compiles the list of voters registered to have voted on polling day and compares them against the list of voters in the certified registers of electors for the election. Those who were not registered as having voted on polling day are included in the list of non-voters, which is published after each election for inspection. The non-voter list contains the names of people who have not turned up to vote. The vast majority of them did not vote either because they were not in Singapore or were ill on polling day. For these cases, their names were not crossed out in the hard copy polling registers as they did not turn up at the polling stations. After each election, there would be a few voters who claimed that they had voted even though, upon checking, their names were not crossed out in the hard copy polling registers. Thus, in reply to Mr. Pritam Singh's question, prior to the introduction of electronic registration at GE 2020, ELD encountered only a few cases of voters who were on the non-voter list who claimed that they had voted. For GE 2020, GE 2015, and GE 2011, ELD recorded about 111,000, 155,000, and 147,000 non-voters respectively. As can be seen, the non-voter list for GE 2020 was much smaller rather than bigger than the two previous GEs. As per every election, ELD published the non-voter list for voters to verify about 3 months after GE 2020. This was publicized via a press release on 5th October 2020, which was covered by mainstream media. Ms. He asked why a tally of the number of NRICs scanned and the number of votes cast after the last general election was not conducted as a first instance check. Given the much lower number of non-voters for GE 2020 compared to the two general elections before, ELD did not suspect that an unusual number of voters had not been recorded as registered. Checking the registration figures at the end of polling day may also not be instructive, and this is because the process to ensure voting secrecy means that we will not be able to identify individual voters, including those who have not been registered accurately and would therefore be listed as non-voters in due course. Furthermore, every voter receives only one ballot paper, and the ballot boxes which contains all the cast ballot papers are always in the custody of the election officials, properly sealed with polling and counting agents able to witness this process and secure while in transit. Ahead of presidential election 2023, ELD publicized that the revised register were available for inspection from 15 June 2023, and that the certified registers which contains updated information from the inspection period were available for inspection from 21st July 2023. These exercises were carried out to enable Singaporeans to check their details and restore their names to the registers ahead of the election. From October 2020 to the day of the writ in August this year, some 32,000 voters checked and restored their names. Similar to previous exercises, there were very few who requested ELD to restore their names due to inaccuracy in the recording of their voting status in GE 2020. As such, ELD did not suspect that there were significant inaccuracies in the recording. The list of non-voters had been opened for inspection shortly after GE 2020, and the public were reminded that the registers were available for inspection in June and July 2023 before the writ for PE 23 was issued. Voters need not wait for this period but are able to check the status in the registers all year round, either through the voter services on ELD website, at any of our over 100 community centers or clubs, or by calling ELD. However, there remain some voters who did not check that their names were on the registers. After the writ was issued for PE 2023 and up to polling day, 1,093 Singaporeans informed the ELD that they did not receive their poll card even though they said they had voted in GE 2020. For context, this number averages one voter per polling station, which had an average of 2,400 registered voters in GE 2020. So this is about one voter per polling station, which had an average of 2,400 registered voters in GE 2020. Further, ELD's analysis of the distribution of the affected voters show that there is no pattern across the polling stations, and the 1,093 cases were distributed across more than 500 polling stations. ELD has investigated this and concluded that the most probable cause of the error was that NRIC details of these affected voters had not been captured properly by the electronic registration system, which was only introduced from GE 2020. This is because the proper registration procedure may not have been followed for the affected voters, especially in some of the more crowded stations. Let me explain. A voter's NRIC and poll card are first checked by election officials at the registration counter before the NRIC is scanned to register the voter. When the NRIC of a voter is scanned by the barcode reader, an alert or beep sound will be emitted, and a digital screen will flash the OK button, indicating that the voter data has been successfully captured in the system. At this point, the election official should tap the OK button to return the registration screen so that the NRIC of the next voter can be scanned. If the NRIC of the next voter is scanned when the screen was not returned to the registration screen, the alert sound will still be emitted, as this indicates that the NRIC has been scanned. However, the record of this voter would not have been captured. It is likely that in their effort to clear the queues at some polling stations quickly in GE 2020, some election officials might have missed out this step. As a result, the registration of the affected voters was not captured. For presidential election 2023, we implemented a new electronic registration system with a simplified process. Elections officials need not press any button to return the registration screen to register the next voter. Therefore, the issue of non-captured registrations as a result of not pressing a button would no longer arise. Dr. Tan asked what is being done to ensure that all who voted were registered, and Dr. Tan, Mr. Singh, and Mr. Liang also asked what will be done to prevent a recurrence where those who had voted were inadvertently removed from the registers. Going forward, besides making a public call for voters to check their status when the non-voter list is published for verification, ELD will institute an additional measure to individually inform Singaporeans on the non-voters list via mail and through SG Notify in SingPass to verify their status, and to restore their names to the registers if need be. We thank Ms. Ng Ling Ling for her suggestion. Dr. Tan asked about the number of polling stations that experienced technical issues with the electronic registration system during the recent presidential election 2023. Based on ELD's preliminary investigations, there was a 30% average loss in device connectivity in the first hour of polling, and this reduced to 16% by 10 a.m. There was no evidence that this was caused by cyber attacks. Instead, this could have been partly contributed by the surge in the volume of transactions during the morning peak, where about 52% of the total number of voters had already voted in the first 4 hours, compared to 32% in GE 2020. For the presidential election 2023, ELD had endeavored to reduce queues and waiting times for the convenience of voters. The number of polling stations was increased by 15% to 1,264 stations from the 1,097 stations in GE 2020. This reduced the average number of voters assigned to a polling station from about 2,400 voters in GE 2020 to 2,150 voters in PE 2023. Each polling station also had more e-registration devices than before, from between 2 to 4 devices each, proportionate to the number of voters in the polling stations, with an additional spare device each for contingency. For reference, a polling station with only 2 e-registration devices can process at least 6 voters per minute on average, which is a 50% higher throughput compared to the manual registration rate, which does so at an average of 4 voters per minute. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank our election officials who adapted quickly and kicked in the contingency measure as planned to register voters using the hard copy registers which they had been trained to do so. As a result, by 9:55 a.m., ELD had reported that queues had improved at most stations. We would also like to thank voters who had queued longer during the morning peak hours during polling day for their patience and understanding. The electronic registration system seeks to reduce waiting times and automate attendance, taking for the benefit of our voters. ELD will continue to enhance the system so that the registration data are captured swiftly and accurately.
Dr. Tan Wu Meng.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his answer. Let me first declare that I have Clementi residents who were affected and shared their concerns with me as their MP. I declare that I have a Clementi resident who remembered voting in 2020, but in 2023 found she wasn't on the register belatedly, and she regrets not having had the chance to vote and choose her president at the ballot box that day. I also have Clementi residents who saw how hard our election officials, how hard our public officers worked, and the heroic efforts made by our public officers when technical difficulties arose. Can I ask the Minister supplementary questions on what I'll call 3 R's: reliability, resilience, responsibility? Firstly, on reliability, when an electronic registration system is tested, is it benchmarked for 100% accuracy in the tender requirements, at least as good as paper, if not better? On resilience, can I ask, ahead of the presidential election, was there a proper full dress rehearsal incorporating setup, login, getting the terminals up and ready, and then comprehensive load testing beyond what would be the traditional expected loads to stress test the system? This is because I have residents who have concerns about whether someday there may be cyber interference, and we know what advanced persistent threats are out there. Lastly, the 3rd R, on responsibility. Can I ask the Minister, I note that the Elections Department website mentions your vote decides the future of Singapore. How we design these systems also shapes the voting process as well. Can Minister assure us that ELD will do its level best to learn from this and to continue improving, in particular, contractor specifications, tender requirements, so that the situations like this can be avoided in future? Thank you very much.
Minister Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Let me respond to the 3 supplementary questions. I start with the 3rd one. Yes, definitely ELD will continue to improve just as per every election. It will take in the debrief and feedback from all members of the public and also members in this chamber, and it will continue to seek to strive better, be it process-wise or the technical issues that we face. So that's the 3rd question that Dr. Tan asked. The second one, on the issue of reliability, yes, indeed, ELD has specifications on the reliability standards. And let me perhaps take these questions a bit further to explain what we mean by reliability standards. The reliability of a system depends on a few parts. And to answer the second question, all these were also done to stress test. First, we have to make sure that the hardware is functioning well. Second, we have to make sure that the connectivity between the about 4,500 systems all around the island is connected well and has certain redundancy. And third, we have to make sure that the software is also working fine. So as I've explained, the first thing is that for this particular PE, we have ruled out the issue of a cyber attack. So we have narrowed that down. The second thing is that we have also checked that the hardware has worked well and it wasn't the main contributory factor to the slowness in the first 1 hour. In fact, the slowness that started at 8:30 that lasted until about 10 a.m. During the polling day itself. The third thing is about the connectivity. For all the ELD polling stations, we have double redundancy to make sure that we did not rely on any particular network, and this was also stress tested during the run-up. In fact, the ELD did their technical test prior to polling day itself. They made a full dress rehearsals with all the devices on to check through the connectivity issues and the hardware issues, and they were satisfied that they are all in working condition. We have ELD in their initial debrief have pretty much narrowed this down to a technical issue that has to do with the software. And let me explain it in layman terms as follows. In ELD stress test, they stress test a certain volume of transactions within a certain amount of time. So this election, notwithstanding the fact that within the first 4 hours, 52% of the people have voted compared to 32% in the last GE, we have stress tested that scenario. But there was one particular feature that perhaps on hindsight, the technical people could have looked deeper into this issue. And that is that when all the devices were sending messages to the central server and getting a response, when the inordinate amount of search happened, some of the messages did not get through. And when the messages did not get through, the packets of messages did not get through, the system kept trying. And because as the system kept trying, it continues to pile up a backlog of packets that have to be cleared. When ELD technical officials realized this, after when 8:30, when this thing happened, they quickly increased the memory and computing power capacity, and this helped us to quickly resolve the issue. So if you like, some messages did not get through, they continue to pile up, creating a backlog, and it caused a bit of a cascade effect. But with the quick discovery of this problem, the ELD officials were able to quickly increase the computing power and also the memory in order to clear the backlog. But once the backlog had set in, it took us about an hour plus to clear the backlog and return the clearance speed to normal. But I must say that on your assurance about the redundancy, all the ELD planning norms have made it such that in every of the polling station, even if all the electronic registration system fail, we will be able to clear the queues with the manual processes as we have done in the past. So baseline, manual processes would allow us to comfortably clear all the voters in that polling stations. On top of that, whenever there are the electronic supplements, they will help us to speed up the clearance even faster, which is why for this particular PE, even though there were 52% of the voters voting in the first 4 hours, by about 10 plus a.m. in the morning, we have pretty much managed to clear all the queues and clear 52% of the people, the voters, within the first 4 hours.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Sir, between the 11th and 24th of August, the Election Department's press release stated, the press release of the 24th of August, it stated that about 200 Singaporeans had informed ELD that their names were not in the register of electors even though they had voted in GE 2020. The Minister has said in his reply that this number is now 1,093. Based on the Minister's reply, will the ELD be sending letters and notifications to all non-voters in GE 2020 who have not applied to put themselves back on the register of electors to ensure that no voter has been struck off due to the additional steps in the electronic registration system process that was employed in GE 2020?
Sorry. Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank Mr. Pritam Singh for his supplementary questions. First, let me assure Mr. Pritam Singh, all the 1,093 voters who are left out or not registered properly for PE 2023, all their names have been restored to the register. And now ELD is doing the reconciliation for the PE 23. All the non-voters list for the PE 23, we will be sending them personal notifications, as I've explained, to encourage them to verify their status.
Mr. Liang Eng Hua.
Thank you, sir. Two further questions for the ministers. Firstly, let me just pick up my points. Given that voting is compulsory in Singapore, why does the ELD not automatically update all the citizens' names on the register of electors after each elections? That will minimize some of this problem that we just talked about. My second question is, what is the purpose of this administrative step for those who did not vote the last election to apply for your name to be restored to the register? Is this necessary, or is the purpose really that still meaningful today, given that it can opens up to potential operational slips and also additional administrative work for the ELD and the voters as well have to go and put back their names? So is the purpose still a meaningful one?
Minister Chan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, we thank Mr. Liang Eng Hua for his feedback. Precisely because voting is compulsory, the Election Act requires, let me say that again, precisely because voting is compulsory, the Election Act requires that the names of the non-voters be expunged from the registers if they do not vote. This is in the Election Act. And a penalty of $50 must be paid for one's name to be restored if he or she does not provide a valid reason for not voting, and the penalty is waived if the voter is able to provide a valid reason such as being overseas on polling day. Otherwise, he or she will no longer be able to vote in future elections or to stand nominated as a candidate for an election. In other words, the penalty for not voting and the process of expunging the names of non-voters gives effect to the notion of compulsory voting. Starting on a clean slate with no penalty will undermine this.
Ms. Hertingru?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two supplementary questions for the Minister. The first being, leaving aside secrecy, which of course we agree is very important, does ELD have data about how many total ICs were scanned during the GE 2020 elections versus how many votes were eventually recorded as being cast during the election? That would actually give us, I guess, a first instance indication of whether there's any discrepancy beyond the 1,097 voters that have contacted ELD to say that, they voted, but their names were actually erroneously removed from the register. So that's my first question. My second question is, I note that in reply to one of my parliamentary questions in 2020, the Minister stated then that in 2019 and 2016, sort of one-off exercises were done to remind voters whose names whose names were actually not on the register, to ask them to take action to actually reapply to go back onto the register. And I'm just wondering whether we can do a one-off sweep this time to all voters, including voters that actually were removed from the register prior to GE 2020 and the PE 2023, to ask them to actually take action to put their names back on. And also in that vein, whether or not we can make it standard practice after every election that ELD would then send out a notice to voters who did not vote, asking them to actually apply, and so that you don't just rely on press releases. Thank you.
Minister Chan?
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me answer Ms. Hertingru's first question. At the end of every polling day, there will be a combination of electronic records in the current system, plus some manual records, because in instances whereby the electronic system malfunction or fail for whatever reason, we will have it at a manual record. So at the end of each polling day, we won't immediately have the numbers because there is an electronic data set which we have to also reconcile with the manual set. So that's the answer to the first questions. And even if we can reconcile it immediately, it will not be able to tell us who are the non-voters accurately. So I hope that answers your first question. On the second question, indeed, actually, it's not so much about one-time sweep or when is the so-called, when can the voters check their names. Actually, as I've explained in my reply, actually, once the reconciliation is done, from that period until the next election when the writ is issued, at any point in time, the voters can check their status. And we agree with you, we encourage all the voters to check their status anytime. It's not just only during the period whereby ELD publicizes this. ELD will, of course, make the publications, but the voters can go to any of the CC, go to the ELD websites to check their status. On top of that, this time round, we are specifically adding in this extra step whereby those who are specifically listed in the non-voters list will be encouraged to go and check their status way ahead of the next election.
Mr. Pritam Singh?
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, just on my earlier supplementary question, so the 200 and later on the number was revised to 1,093. These are individuals who got in touch with the ELD to inform ELD that, hey, I'm not on the list even though I did vote in 2020. My question is, again, based on your reply, you said in G20, following G2020, there were 111,000 non-voters. And then from October 2020 to August 2023, 32,000 individuals applied to restore their names. So this 32,000 would have to be a part of this 111,000 who were non-voters. So my point is there's actually possibly another 80,000 voters who, as of P 2023, could also be non-voters but who voted in G 2020. I just want to confirm whether ELD also is going to reach out to everyone to ensure that they have not been erroneously struck off the voting. So I hope you got the subject of matter of my first set of SQs.
Minister Chan.
Let me explain the numbers. So there's 111,000 non-voters. The vast bulk of these non-voters, be it in GE 11, 15, or 20, they are either overseas or some of them could be very old and very frail, and then they didn't vote. So the vast bulk of this. So that 32,000 who asked to be restored, chances are that most of them were perhaps overseas or ill on that day, and they were asked to restore. I don't think you will have 111,000 minus 32,000 and therefore end up with about 79,000 of people who have voted, and that won't happen because from the numbers you know that this is not the case. And also from the previous experience, we know that the people who are so-called registered wrongly is not in that order of magnitude. It's not in that order. Perhaps I should just explain in case there's any, just to put aside any doubt that this has in any way affected the accuracy or the validity of the results. Of course, first thing I must say is this. ELD will endeavor to make sure that we minimize the error to as close to zero as possible. Okay, it's very difficult because whether it's a manual system or electronic system, sometimes there will be an error. But we will endeavor to make sure that this error is to the minimum possible. But just to give a bit of context, what is the error rate like? So just now I explained, a typical polling station would have about, say, 2,500 voters. And the error, just now as what we have described, is about, on average, is about 1 per polling station, which means about 1 in 2,500. That's the margin of error. Now, if we look at our recent GE results, the closest contest, if I remember correctly, it should be Potong Pasir in 2011. Right? It's about 100 plus votes difference out of about 20,000 voters. So that margin is about 1 in 2,000, 1 in 200, right? Maybe 1 in 200, thereabout. That is the winning margin, the closest ever. But our error is, the closest ever is more than 1 in 2,000, or rather less than 1 in 2,000. So I just want to assure the public that ELD has gone through the records, and while there is a margin of error, this margin of error is nowhere to the extent that you will call into questions any of the elections result that we have in recent memories. So I hope that's it.
Okay, one last clarification.
Yes, Minister, maybe I wasn't clear about the so-called 80,000. I'm not saying that all 80,000 there would have been some mistake. I'm just saying there could be some individuals who also did not vote, who voted in GE 2020, but they have not informed the elections department yet. That's the group that I'm concerned. Just very quickly, and just continuing on what Minister said towards the end about elections department. So on the day the press release was sent, I dropped a note to the ELD because I had members of the public write to me about this problem. And I would just like to say ELD replied on the same day and assured me that they are looking into the matter. And I think it's important to also assure members of the public that I think the ELD is trying, it has been quite forthright in its communication with me at least.
Minister Chan.
So yes, indeed. So 111,000 after the 32,000, we will do the reconciliation again this time. So whoever is exactly as what I say, we will send them all the non-voters list names. We will send them an individual reminder henceforth to remind them to make the check. So we don't rule out that there could be a few more who may have voted but may have recorded wrongly. And this going forward, we will always do this process. That means all those on the non-voters list, for whatever reasons they were on the non-voters list, we will send them an individual reminder on top of the public service announcements that we have made. Thank you.